There is a silent presence inside you, fragile, sensitive, often afraid. It's not weakness. It's not immaturity. It's the inner child you left behind while trying to grow up too fast. That child still whispers in your moments of anxiety, screams in your anger, and retreats in your shame. You may think you've outgrown your childhood, but it still lives in your decisions, your relationships, and your deepest doubts. Until you face this hidden child, you will unknowingly repeat the same chaos and call it fate. But there's a path forward, a way out. If you stay with me to the end, you'll understand not only how this invisible child shaped your present, but how you can reclaim the lost power buried in that forgotten self. And finally, step into clarity. There is a presence within you that you did not create, yet it shaped the very fabric of who you are. You carry it not in memory, but in behavior, not in thought, but in instinct. This presence is the child you once were, still alive in the architecture of your psyche. It has a voice, though not always in words. It speaks in impulses, in fears, in that sudden irrational panic that arises in moments far removed from any logical threat. You might dismiss it. You might try to suppress it, but it does not go away. The inner child does not age, and it does not forget. It is a living psychic reality, a figure within the unconscious that continues to exert its influence long after childhood has passed. To understand this child, you must understand the nature of your own psyche. Human beings are not merely adults who have outgrown their past. They are adults built upon that past. Every wound, every unmet need, every unspoken longing in childhood becomes a pattern, a script, a silent command embedded deep within the unconscious. The child within you was not just absorbing external stimuli, it was forming the emotional foundation of your identity. That foundation, when left unchecked or unexplored, becomes the invisible lens through which you interpret the world. This is why you react with disproportionate anger to being ignored, why you feel crippling fear when facing something new, why you struggle to trust or to feel worthy of love. These are not random emotional reactions. They are echoes of moments when your inner child felt unseen, unsafe, or unloved. And the tragedy is that most people go through life believing these reactions are flaws, character defects, or just the way they are. They fail to see that these responses are not who they are, but who they were, frozen in time, seeking resolution through repetition. What begins in childhood often becomes the architecture of adulthood. If the child was taught that love must be earned through perfection, the adult becomes an anxious performer, terrified of failure. If the child learned that anger led to abandonment, the adult suppresses all conflict, even to their own detriment. These patterns are not choices, they are defenses, developed not out of weakness, but out of necessity. The psyche is not cruel, it is protective. But what once protected you now imprisons you, and the key to freedom is not in force or willpower, but in recognition. Recognition is the first step toward integration. You must be willing to look back not with judgment, but with compassion. You must become aware of the patterns that have governed your life, not as a critic, but as a seeker. Why do you keep attracting the same kind of people? Why does fear arise in the presence of success? Why do you feel a constant emptiness even when everything seems fine? These questions are not merely therapeutic, they are spiritual. They are invitations to meet the inner child, still waiting in the shadows of your soul. It is not the past itself that haunts us, but the unresolved past. The parts of your story that were too painful, too confusing, or too shameful to face, were exiled from your conscious awareness, but not from your being. The psyche, in its brilliance, stores what the ego cannot bear, and in doing so, it gives you a second chance. Because what was repressed is not lost, is waiting. The child is waiting. For you. Not to punish, but to be seen, to be held, to be understood. This brings us to the most subtle and dangerous mechanism of all, projection. Projection is the act of seeing in others what you have not yet accepted in yourself. It is the unconscious spilling itself into the external world, disguising internal conflict as outer problems. You project the pain of your inner child onto your relationships, your career, your spirituality, believing the source of your suffering lies outside you, when in fact, it lies buried within. You might find yourself constantly seeking approval, chasing people who are emotionally unavailable, or reacting with intense emotion to seemingly small provocations. These are not coincidences. They are projections. The unavailable partner becomes the parent who never truly saw you. The boss who criticizes you becomes the voice of your childhood shame. The friend who leaves you awakens the ancient fear of abandonment. And each time, the inner child cries out not because the pain is new, but because it has never been resolved. To heal, you must stop blaming the mirror and begin examining the face that looks into it. The people in your life may trigger your wounds, but they are not the source of them. The source is within. And the journey inward is not easy. The child does not trust easily. It remembers betrayal. It remembers silence. It remembers the pain of being dismissed, minimized, or ignored. But if you come with gentleness, with curiosity rather than condemnation, you will begin to earn its trust. And in doing so, you unlock a kind of wisdom that no adult intellect can manufacture. The inner child knows things the adult has forgotten. It remembers how to wonder, how to dream, how to feel without numbing. These qualities were not lost, they were buried. And in healing the wounds of the child, you do not simply recover from pain, you recover access to life itself. Your creativity, your joy, your spontaneity, these are not luxuries. They are your birthright. And they are guarded by the parts of you that were wounded long ago. To enter into this healing is to enter sacred territory. You are not merely fixing a problem, you are restoring a soul. And this restoration cannot be rushed. It cannot be forced. It must be felt. You must allow yourself to grieve not just what happened, but what never happened. The love that wasn't given. The words you needed to hear, but never received. The safety that was absent. These unmet needs left an imprint. And unless they are acknowledged, they will unconsciously govern your life, demanding fulfillment in ways that only deepen your suffering. The world becomes the stage for the child's unresolved longing. That is why success without healing feels hollow. Why love without self-understanding becomes dependency. Why achievement without inner wholeness leads to burnout. You can have everything externally and still feel like something is missing, because what's missing is not a thing, it's a part of you. A younger part, a softer part, a part that longs not for success, but for connection. Not for perfection, but for presence. The child within you doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to be loved, to be listened to be told, perhaps for the first time, you are safe now. You are not alone. I see you. These words, spoken from the adult self to the child within, begin a revolution. Because once the inner child feels safe, the chaos begins to settle. The need to control, to please, to perform, to withdraw begin to fade. And in their place, clarity emerges, not as a flash of insight, but as a slow and steady alignment with the truth. The truth that you are not broken, but divided. That the chaos you experience is the psyche's way of asking for reintegration, and that reintegration begins with seeing clearly what has always been hidden in plain sight. The child who never left. This child is not a weakness. It is the keeper of your emotional truth. It holds your earliest perceptions of the world raw, unfiltered, and real. And those perceptions, left unexamined, become destiny. But when you turn toward them, when you bring the light of consciousness into the dark corners of your early experience, you begin to rewrite the script. You reclaim authorship of your life. Yet this process requires honesty, radical honesty, about the ways in which you've lived in reaction, not intention. About the roles you've played to survive, the masks you've worn to be accepted, the walls you've built to avoid being hurt again. These were not mistakes. They were intelligent adaptations, but adaptation is not freedom. True freedom begins where adaptation ends, where the child no longer needs to protect itself, because the adult has learned to protect them both. And so, the journey continues not forward, but inward, into the rooms of the psyche, where the child still waits, where the chaos still echoes, and where, if you're willing to listen, clarity will begin to whisper its name. When you begin to reclaim the lost parts of yourself, those fragments of the inner child exiled long ago, you do not merely remember. You re-enter a relationship with your own soul. You find, often with surprise, that the parts you are most ashamed of are also the parts that carry your light. The truth is, we do not bury only pain. We also bury joy, imagination, and freedom. When a child is told they are too much, too sensitive, too loud, or too wild, they learn to suppress not just pain, but vitality. And so, what begins as a defense becomes a cage. You grow older, but the richness of your spirit remains hidden beneath layers of compliance, fear, and false identity. Reclaiming the inner child means unlocking the self you abandoned in order to be accepted. And in doing so, you come into contact with your original energy, the core of who you are, before the world told you who to be. But to reclaim this lost essence requires more than reflection. It requires courage. Courage to face not only the wounds, but also the shame that wrapped around them like a second skin. For many, Shame is more unbearable than pain. Pain is finite. Shame lingers. It whispers lies in your most vulnerable moments. That you are not enough. That your emotions are weaknesses. That your dreams are foolish. These whispers are not your true voice. They are the internalized voices of those who once failed to see your worth. And as long as these voices go unchallenged, they rule your inner world like tyrants disguised as protectors. Reclaiming the inner child means you must challenge these voices, not by arguing with them, but by choosing to listen to a deeper truth, one rooted in wholeness. This process of reclamation is not a regression into childishness. It is a return to innocence, not naivety, but the uncorrupted essence of your being. The child within you does not need to be controlled. They need to be included. They need to be given a voice, a place at the table of your adult life. When the inner child is embraced, a profound integration begins to take place. The adult gains access to creative spontaneity, deep empathy, and intuitive wisdom. The child gains structure, protection, and grounding. Together, they form a self that is both strong and soft, both wise and wild. This is the essence of psychological wholeness, not perfection, but integration. In Jungian psychology, this union is part of the great journey of individuation, the unfolding of the self, through the integration of unconscious material into conscious awareness. The inner child is not just a part of that journey, it is a gatekeeper. Without tending to this part of the psyche, the path remains blocked. You can pursue spiritual practices, career success, even therapeutic work, but if the inner child remains unseen, the foundation will be incomplete. The psyche will call you back again and again to what you have tried to skip. It will not let you bypass the child, and this is not punishment. It is love. The psyche seeks wholeness. It seeks truth, and it will continue to bring forth the forgotten, the repressed, the abandoned, not to hurt you, but to heal you. As the inner child begins to feel seen, a quiet trust begins to develop between the conscious and unconscious mind. Dreams shift. Emotional patterns soften. Where there was chaos, there is now the beginning of dialogue. But even this is not the end. There is yet another layer to this transformation. The emergence of clarity. Clarity is not the absence of confusion. It is the ability to stand within the confusion and see through it. It is not achieved by force or by intellect alone, but by alignment, by the union of inner parts that were once at war with one another. When the inner child is acknowledged and integrated, the psyche no longer needs to cry out in symptoms. Anxiety lessens. Triggers lose their power. Patterns begin to dissolve. What remains is not a blank slate, but a canvas ready for the conscious creation of a life rooted in authenticity. This authenticity is the fruit of individuation. It is the result of inner alignment between what you feel, what you believe, and how you act. No longer performing for acceptance, you begin to speak from your center. No longer chasing validation, you begin to create from truth. This is not arrogance. It is humility in its purest form. The humility of one who knows who they are, and no longer pretends to be otherwise. But such clarity is not a peak that you reach and remain upon. It is a rhythm, a return, a practice. Because life will continue to test your alignment. Relationships will stretch you. Loss will shake you. Fear will return. But with the inner child on your side, not hidden, but held, you will not collapse into chaos. You will navigate it. Navigating chaos with clarity is the mark of the individual self. Chaos is no longer seen as a threat to avoid, but as a space in which deeper truths are revealed. You learn to sit in discomfort without abandoning yourself. You learn to listen to the discomfort, to decode its message. The child may still cry out, but now, there is someone there to listen. You become the presence that you once longed for, the protector, the witness, the guide. And this changes everything, not just for you, but for how you move through the world. Relationships transform, not because others change, but because your dynamics shift. You are no longer seeking to be rescued. You are no longer projecting your unmet needs onto others. Instead, you bring your whole self into connection, vulnerable, yes, but also grounded. You begin to set boundaries not as barriers, but as bridges to healthier interactions. You express needs without shame. You hear no without collapse. Because you are no longer negotiating your worth, you know it, and this knowing was born not from external validation, but from the long and often painful journey inward, to the child, to the shadow, to the soul. In this space of inner clarity, even suffering begins to shift. Pain does not disappear, but it no longer defines you. You begin to understand suffering not as a flaw in the design of life, but as an invitation, a threshold, a teacher. Each wound becomes a well drawing you deeper into the essence of who you are. You begin to see that healing is not a project to complete, but a relationship to tend. The child, the adult, the unconscious, the aspects of the self working together in quiet harmony. This harmony is subtle. It does not scream. It does not boast. But it transforms you. Others feel it in your presence. You become safe not because you never hurt, but because you've faced your hurt and made peace with it. You become clear not because you always know, but because you are no longer afraid to admit when you don't. You become alive not because life is always easy, but because you are no longer asleep to it. Clarity, then, is not the destination. It is the result of consistent inner contact, of returning again and again to the places you once abandoned, of choosing presence over perfection, of choosing to listen, even when it hurts, of choosing to stay with yourself, even when every instinct tells you to run. And the more you choose this, the more the world begins to reflect it back. Opportunities align, synchronicities appear. What once felt impossible begins to unfold, not through striving, but through being fully, unapologetically, wholly yourself. But the journey continues. There is more still hidden in the depths. More truth waiting to emerge. The psyche is a vast terrain, and no single integration completes the work. Each moment of clarity opens the door to a deeper level of becoming. Each reunion with a lost part makes space for the next. And so you walk not as one seeking escape, but as one returning home. Home to yourself. Home to the child. Home to the self that has always been quietly waiting beneath the noise of the world.